Hey, Phil.
Hey, Senda.
You want to talk about collaborative world building?
I do, but only if we can talk about it together.
So that we could be collaborative?
See?
Yeah, I see what you did there.
Cue music. And welcome to Panda's Talking Games. I am one of your very collaborative hosts, Phil.
And I am your other very collaborative host, Senda. And tonight's topic comes from Lord Neptune on Twitter, who asks, have you ever covered collaborative world building as part of character creation, giving players ultimate agency over the world they are going to play in and the type of story they will tell?
Well, hoo-yah.
I feel like we should mention one more thing here, because Lord Neptune is, of course, one half of the character creation cast.
Indeed.
So if you haven't listened to that and you're into character creation, there's a reason he's asking us a question related to character creation.
Indeed. And I wouldn't actually say it's part of character creation as much as I would say it's part of Session Zero.
Yeah. He's relating it to character creation.
To work in the
all
character
is
creation.
Mushy, like Session Zero goodness.
Nice SEO there.
Well done, Ryan.
Okay, we are actually both big fans of collaborative world building, so I thought this would be like a really fun topic to do tonight.
So to get started, how do we define collaborative world building, definition Panda?
Yep. Let's start it out by breaking down. Let's try that all over again. Let's start by breaking it down with world building, right? World building is an activity where details about the setting of the game are determined. And they can be really large things, like the details of a country or of a war, or they can be really small things, like some interesting elements about an inn or a town. Regardless of the scale, the details add information to the canon of the world, and we wind up knowing more about the world than we did before.
Right, so historically this job was the game master's job. They were responsible for creating the details of the world and conveying that to the players in the form of descriptions. And that might have been like if they were just describing something that was pre-written, or if they were making their own homebrew setting, then they could do a significant amount of work and actually create all of this stuff from scratch, right? So the idea of the GM being the person responsible for the world and the creation of the world has carried through into a lot of traditional games. It's still pretty common today. If you play a traditionally laid out game, the GM is probably responsible for the world and the setting and all of that kind of stuff, because that's sort of the non-PC stuff.
Yeah. So a number of games began to change this model and started making world building a collaborative effort by including players into the creation process. And so like my earliest encounter with this that I can remember being codified in a game, and I could be wrong, but my first one, the first one that jumped to mind when I thought about this was the Dresden Files RPG, where after you create your characters, you create the city by creating interesting locations and NPCs tied to them, right? That is absolutely world building, and it's totally collaborative because the whole group takes part in it. Now, since then, more and more games have started to use collaborative world building, and on top of it, the idea of collaborative world building has kind of spilled out. So even games that don't have collaborative world building built into them, people are using those techniques to kind of include them in your game. So if you're like, well, I play D&D and we totally did collaborative world building, cool. It's not actually coded in the game, but it's totally cool to do.
Yeah, we're super excited that you are.
Absolutely.
And also, I just played like 8 hours of game today, and basically it was like so much collaborative world building for like 8 hours, and it's great. And
right,
it's
but you were playing
fun.
a story game. You were playing an unpublished story game, right?
But I also played Dialect, right? And that also has a bunch of shared world building, partially through the discovery of language.
Absolutely, and that is
right?
and that's another story game. So we definitely see, right? So we definitely see collaborative world building as a it's definitely a part of story games, a large part of story games. Yeah. Again, not always required, but you see it frequently there. But again, we can definitely do it in traditional games as well.
Right, implement it anywhere you want. So here are some of the reasons that we like it and think that it's good for your games.
Yeah. First of all, creativity. right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to creative things, collaboration always makes things more interesting. Collaborative creativity always pushes you out of your own comfort zones. So, if I leave you to make your own town, you're going to, kind of gravitate towards the things that you normally would think of, the places and spaces where you're comfortable. But if I add 3 or 4 people in and have them throwing elements at you as well, now we're pushing you out of your comfort zone, and that additive effect of more minds, more cooks to the pot kind of thing actually makes it more creative.
Yeah, agree. It's also love lettering, right? So by having players contribute parts of the world, they're able to kind of tell you as the GM the things that are interesting to them that they would like to encounter, or the kinds of problems they would like to deal with in the game, because they're setting them up for you. They're like doing the work for you, and all you have to do is kind of take some notes.
Which gets us to our third point, which is less work for the GM.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So if your group is participating in collaborative world building, then unlike in the past when you would be kind of expected to kind of whip up the entire world from scratch yourself, now you're contributing a part of it, but you're just collecting the information from everyone else and putting that to use. So it definitely reduces the workload on the GM. And honestly, anything that reduces the workload on the GM is always a good thing.
Super good, yeah. And the last one, which it might be my favorite part of this, is that it increases the emotional investment of everybody at the table in the game. So by creating things they're interested in, the players always have an emotional connection to the world and the stuff that they made, but it also decreases the probability of ending up in a game where, like, you as the GM have spent hours and hours carving out this amazing setting and world that you want to play with, and then you're trying to fill up your players' minds with all of this information about the setting. If they're giving you information about the setting too, now they are just as invested in this setting as you are. And it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing that we see as those elements that they created get incorporated is that we see that loop. It's the loop that we always say when somebody suggests something, when you incorporate it and give it back to them, right? It creates this loop. Like, I put an idea out to the world, and then it comes back to me in the form of play, right? That is very satisfying, right? Because
extremely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it creates that feedback loop, which is part of what creates that emotional investment, because now it's like, oh, I had this cool idea for this world element. Oh, and we played it and it was so awesome. Like, boom, there's that loop, right?
Yeah.
And as we know, the more emotionally invested players and GMs, because GMs are also a special type of player, the more emotionally invested players are in a campaign world and campaign, the better chance that the game will survive the turbulence of scheduling issues and an off session here and there and stuff like that, right? Like, when we're not emotionally invested, like, we will punch out of a game over almost any disruption, right? Like, oh, somebody can't make it. Cool. We don't have to play tonight.
We're done. Yeah, we're done. Yeah.
Like, oh, we didn't play 2 times in a row. Cool. Maybe we should play a different game.
Yeah, let's choose something else. Yeah.
Right. But if we have a high degree of emotional investment, right, this thing can ride the rapids, right? Like, you and your players will find a way to get back to this game.
Yeah.
All right. It's cool. That's emotional investment. So I think it's pretty obvious that we are big fans of collaborative world building. So for the rest of the episode, we're going to give some advice about collaborative world building in 2 different ways.
Yes. I am going to talk about using it when you are in your session 0.
Yeah. And then I'm going to talk about it when you use it in the middle of running your game. Yeah. So do you want to take us all the way to the beginning when we are first sitting down at the table to hatch out what game we're going to play? What do we do in session 0?
Yeah, I mean, although actually I will say we're actually going to talk about both of these pretty collaboratively. What an idea.
As we do.
Anyway, but so yes, back to session 0. In session 0, collaborative world building is kind of doing 2 things, right? It's creating the setting and it's seeding situations. Mm-hmm. Right. So it's both adventure seeds and it's the space in which the adventure takes place. So keeping in mind that there are sort of 2 distinct categories of types of stuff it does, here are some of our tips.
So first tip is create a tone or theme. And I say create, I mean as a group, create a tone or theme and stick to it. Right. So being collaborative is awesome. And we try to, we always say when we're being collaborative, right, we want to yes and try to be as inclusive as possible to other people's ideas. But we are trying to build a world and we're trying to build a certain type of game that we want to play. And so we do want to adhere to a tone and theme. Otherwise, we're going to have like some really weird disjointed stuff that won't feel very smooth when it comes up in play. Like if, we're doing like a really low magic, Euro based fantasy and then somebody's like, cool, ninjas.
Yeah, ninjas, woohoo.
Right? Because they just love ninjas. Like ninjas just aren't, what we think of when we think of Euro fantasy. But now we're it's not quite, and it's not quite fitting because we were like, no, we were going to play like gritty rat catchers, right? We're going to go like Warhammer-esque, not, whatever. So again, it's worth before opening up your collaborative world building to kind of have a talk and say, cool, what are our general themes? What are we trying to stick to as we add our elements, right? We want to be gritty. We want to be really street level and gritty. Cool. Okay, good. Let's, write that down on an index card or something so people have it as a frame of reference and then stick to it.
So, and I want to add one more thing to that, which is that I do think, so yes and is great, and it's a very good tool for improvising and doing collaboration together. No but is also a super good tool. We are not actually improvising at the table the same way that an improviser would on the stage, right? So it is perfectly reasonable to say, no, that actually falls kind of outside of our themes and our tone as far as I understand it. But could we do something like this that accomplishes the thing that, that person wants out of the game without breaking the theme and the tone, right? So
I love it.
Don't be scared to say no, but in those situations, right?
Oh, I think that's so good. And I want to say it again because I want to highlight something that you said that was really good.
Yeah.
Which is that yes and is a thing that improv people do on stage because they don't want to derail the flow of a scene, right? So it's yes and, right? Because it keeps everything moving. Yes. But you're absolutely right. When we are in a session 0 and we are being collaborative, no but is okay. Yes. Like we can stop valid. And re-angle something. So in our gritty Euro fantasy, if I had been like ninjas.
Yeah. It could be like, well, no, but what if we had a specific sect of rogues that are specifically known for being like sneaky and do hand-to-hand combat, but like in this flavor that now fits in with our like sewer crawl, right?
Exactly. Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Right.
Totally agree. Right. So that's acknowledging that, look, what you're telling me you want is stealthy melee assassins. But but again, because we're trying to stick to tone and theme, how do we make that in our sewer punk? We just built a genre, by the way, in our sewer punk fantasy.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. How do we make that without actually breaking the theme and tone that we have now discussed? Right.
Oh,
anyway, no, but it comes up a lot.
Good.
It happens a lot. Like it happens at my gaming tables a lot. Like it's that seems like a little bit. But what if we? Right.
I'm just going to give the chef kiss, right? Mwah, that is so good.
Anyway, good. So our next tip is to put in things that you want to interact with in the game. So don't add something to the game that you don't want to interact with. Like, just don't do it. Or if somebody else adds something to the game that you're like, I really don't want that to happen, that's what the X card is for. Or even just a discussion about like, I'm really not into that. Is it cool if we leave that out? So connected to this for me is also a conversation that goes with your tone and theme, which is lines and veils, right? And if somebody says something, again, outside of the lines or veils, you may still be able to say, no, that's kind of outside of our lines, but is this okay? And present another option or another angle on it that maybe would work in the game, but doesn't break your lines and veils that everybody would be comfortable with, right?
Cool. And I want to break out a piece that you said because it was super important. Again, because you are on fire with good advice tonight.
I've been like warming up for 8 hours for this podcast today.
So the other thing is, and we didn't have this as a specific tip, but I'm going to add it as a brand new tip, which is use an X card. An X card is a great content editing tool.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at it, how the X card is used in For the Queen, right, it can take out not only what we would consider problematic material, but it can just take out material that doesn't fit where we're going.
Yeah, we don't want this in the story. It just doesn't make sense, right?
You should absolutely have a tool on the table that empowers everyone in the group to be able to kind of veto something if it doesn't fit. And when obviously we're going with the, you want to try to include as much as possible, but there are times where you are going to want to be able to be like, nope, not that.
Yeah. I mean, and to be entirely honest, it happens at my table all the time. We are a super collaborative group, but just like every now and then somebody's like, oh, and then what if this? And we're all like, yeah, well, that doesn't actually kind of fit with this. And we're like, oh, okay, back up. How about like this? Yeah, that, right?
Yep.
So like,
absolutely.
Also, don't be down on someone if they come up with something that doesn't fit, and don't feel bad if you come up with something that doesn't fit. Like, that's fine. Drop that idea, go to the next idea, and run with it. Like, it's all good. It's a collaboration.
If all of a sudden, like our sewer punk game, we're like, and there's cars in the sewer, right? Like,
we'd be like,
no,
maybe
it doesn't really fit our our
could,
tone.
How could we accomplish what you're going for without cars?
Sometimes we just can't, right? Sometimes a no but doesn't work. Sometimes we just got to take that thing.
Sometimes you just got to be like, yeah, back that one up. That doesn't make any sense.
Cool.
Yeah, totally cool. Anyway,
very good. Next piece of advice is build fewer big pieces, right? You want, like, for the big pieces that are going to frame out the campaign, don't build many of them and don't put a lot of description into them.
Yeah.
Because when you're first starting the campaign, we're at session 0 right now, right? We don't know how long this game's going to last. And we also don't know really once it gets started where it's really going to go.
Yeah.
So don't invest a lot of energy in the big elements, like there are 10 factions of the world all at struggle. Cool. That's good enough. Like,
yeah, you don't need to know actually anything more than there are 10 factions.
Maybe name 1 or 2 and then leave the other 8 alone.
Yeah.
Exactly. Once the campaign gets underway, and if that still remains relevant to the campaign, the GM, either through collaborative world building or on their own, can build the rest of that out as the campaign gets underway. But building, like putting the energy into the big sweeping world stuff early in the campaign is never a great idea because you really just don't know what's going to... You may play this game 3 sessions and be like, meh, we're done.
Or
like it didn't work.
You might spend hours and hours putting detail into all 10 of the factions and then only play with one of them for 2 years, right?
Correct. Right.
So like, I mean, it's basically keep things kind of general when they're overarching things.
Exactly. Conversely,
leads right into the next tip, which is build more detailed pieces in the specific environment where you want the campaign to start as a group, right? Because the stuff that you're starting with is the place that you need the detail. The immediate area is where the bulk of the early campaigns are going to take place. So that's the place that you want the details. So if you're in one of those factions and you're doing a job for them or whatever, you probably need to know a bunch about the hierarchy and structure and who you would listen to and who's going to pay you money. And maybe their arch enemy that you're taking the thing from or whatever it is, right? Like those are the places you need detail now.
Right, not all 10 of them, just that.
Not all 10 of them, just the ones that are currently involved in, say, I don't know, starting a war. Oh, is that from personal experience? My bad.
Right. There's probably a thing we could do as a future show talking about zooming out, which is kind of the way I look at campaigns, is that when I start building a new campaign, I zoom all the way in. Yeah. And I pay very little attention to what happens outside of the field of focus.
Yeah.
But I'm very detailed in that one little space. And then as the game progresses, I basically zoom out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And keep adding detail. Right.
Right. As it gets bigger, so the focus area keeps getting bigger. Right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. Last tip of advice here. So we early on talked about that you could either be adding to the setting or potentially seeding situations, right? Plot seeds and things like that. The best elements are when you can combine both into one. So, for instance, the white Fang cult is in this area, and they have a hidden agenda that they are working towards.
Yes.
Right? So, one, we created the White Fang cult. That's cool, right? We have a cult, but we also then gave the GM, they have a hidden agenda that they're working towards. And the cool part is, again, if I am tossing this out as to the rest of the table, to the GM, I didn't say what the hidden agenda was.
No, and maybe it's fun to figure that out, and maybe it's fun to let the GM figure it out.
Yeah, maybe you get to discover it. Throw it out there. Cool.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, that's our session 0. That's our session 0 ideas. Want to talk about mid-game?
Yeah, but you're starting it, so I was just keeping my mouth shut.
Well, cool. I was just going to wait for you to say yes, and then...
Okay,
cool.
yes, let's talk about mid-game.
All right, so in mid-game now, we are now adding elements to the existing world and the existing ongoing game. And so our tips are a little different, not radically different, but a little different because what we're doing now is like a little more focused.
So, a couple of tips. Maintaining continuity, the same way that you had to maintain all of the elements working together before as you were creating a world, the new elements that you're adding still have to fit with all of that stuff. And they still have to fit with your safety that you discussed at the beginning of the game. And they still have to fit with the tone and theme of the game, right? So they need to fit with all of the things you were working with in session 0. And they also need to make sense logically on top of all of the things you did in session 0 and have played through since that point.
Exactly, right? Like, so by continuity, now when you name something in the game, it not only has to fit all the stuff that like you talked about, tone and your lines and veils and stuff like that, but it also has to be in the context of everything that every player has done, every NPC has done, et cetera, right? You can't just jam in some element to get around a problem.
Right. That would be the cars in the sewer. Right. You've been playing 3 weeks of sewer rats, like sewer punk fantasy, and then suddenly you're like, we just need a fast transportation, so there's a car there now.
Be like, what?
No.
Like, that doesn't make sense,
no.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Next tip is when you're creating elements, elements that cause complications are far more interesting than elements by themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So giving some details about the barrister in town is mildly interesting, but telling us that the barrister in town foreclosed on your parents' farm, like, that's way better.
Yeah.
Right? Like, one of those was mildly interesting. Like, here's some descriptions about the barrister. And the other one is way more fun because now we know we have a potential conflict, right, between you and the barrister.
Yeah, and potential conflict is how you get people to roleplay at the table.
Yep.
Because standing around being like, hi, how are you, is like the difficult version that makes us all feel awkward versus storming in and saying, how dare you mess with my parents, is way easier. Anyway, so what you want to do as you're adding elements during play is you want to create potential, not plot, right? So your elements should have the potential to cause problems, but you don't have to go in there and say that this is happening immediately. So if they're going to foreclose on my parents' farm, this is not like necessarily a thing that is happening this instant. Maybe he has the documents in hand. But
or
like,
he's been threatening to do it or something.
He's been threatening to do it. I'm going to let the GM take that and work it into the story at the point that makes the most sense, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to derail the ongoing story, right? Like,
no.
Because if you just made up a point that the barrister is about to foreclose on your parents' farm, you're probably not going to go to the dungeon to go like searching around for, potential artifacts.
Right, to rescue the prince from the dragon, because first you have to rescue your parents. So it has to be like looming, but like not immediate.
Right, so when you describe it, you want to describe it so that you give the GM the freedom to take that element, right? So thank you for the element. Mm-hmm. And then for the GM to be able to like, cool, when they come out of the dungeon, I'm going to have the barrister like nailing up a piece of paper on like the door of their parents' house.
Yeah. Right? I mean, what's really interesting is also talking about this kind of elements in GM-less games where we get to just kind of throw out all these problems onto the table and then like see when someone just finds the right moment to tie one of them back in, right? Because that totally happens too.
Yeah, and so if you're on the player side of this, it's probably worth spending a moment talking about this. When you are the GM and people are collaboratively world building and tossing things out to you, there is a little bit of mental juggling that occurs, right? Because you are, as these things are getting tossed out, the GM has no idea what's coming at them, and they kind of have to look at them and quickly assess, like, is this going to work in the game period? Yes, no. Is this going to work with what I've got going on this moment? Yes, no. And can I fit this somewhere else down the line? Yes, no. And where would that be? And that's all happening. That's all happening like in the GM's brain at like speed of thought. And so like when these things happen for me, like I'm writing them down on an index card.
Right.
And I may jot a note next to it like, oh yeah, totally. Like it's going to happen like next downbeat. Like I'm going to put this in or, oh, I'm going to save this for next session. Like I had this thing where Tony, my Rainmaker, in our Masks game had this girlfriend and they got into this fight for a while, and Tony was like kept pushing her away because he was a superhero, and the Nova no less, right? Dangerous superhero. And the character went to one of the other players for advice and misconstrued all the advice and was going to potentially harm themselves to make Tony rescue them. And I wrote it on an index card and I was like, oh, this is an interesting idea. I'm not ready to do anything with it. And I just wrote it down and I left it like Danny will hurt herself future session, right? And I circled it.
Yeah.
And then as it turned out, right? So was that going to work in the course of the game? Yes. Teen drama. Was it going to work in the current story? No. I had other stuff going on. That's not where I wanted to focus the game. Would this work down the line? Yes. Okay. Save it. So I saved it. And then a session or two later, Danny and their girlfriend had another argument when Danny was like, you are the only thing that keeps me grounded. You are like, I'm lost without you, blah, blah, blah. And I like immediately took my pencil and just like drew a line like, right through like,
star.
Well, like no longer needed,
yep,
right? Like
that's not a thing. Yep.
Like this element is no longer valid in the course of the game, right? But these are the things, just in case you are not doing improv GMing, these are the things that are happening as you're tossing these out. So it's super fun to do, but just know like your GM's doing a lot of work. So to go back to our point, when you create one of these problems, don't put a countdown on it.
Yeah.
Just put it there so the GM can pick it up and figure out where it goes. Sorry, and didn't mean to go the long way around on that.
No, that is totally okay. You should talk about the last thing and we should get out of here.
Yep, last thing. Create your own complications. Don't create other characters' problems. Asterisks.
Yeah.
There's an asterisk, right? There's an asterisk.
We'll get back to that. Yeah.
Okay, so making elements that make things complicated is totally fun, and that was one of our previous tips. But do it to yourself because you are your own consent. Yeah. Right? Like if you choose to do this and make your character's situation complicated, that's cool because you're the owner of that character.
Yeah, you did it.
When you choose to do it, when you come up with something and put it onto somebody else, it's a consent issue.
Yes. So if you are going to do that, then it's valid to say, oh my gosh, it would be really cool if blah, blah, blah. Would that be okay with you? Especially if it's, I feel like this comes up mostly when it's like me and another PC are in a relationship and we're adding in an NPC to make this a really tricky, difficult, like discordant drama love triangle, right? Yep. So like this affects my character, but it also affects someone else's character. I need their agreement before we throw this element in. I need their consent.
I think that's very valid, but I often come up with it for other people's stuff all the time. Like I'll be sitting at a table, I'll be like, oh, what if that was your uncle? Right?
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah. And I will totally say, they'll be like, oh, it would be super cool if that was your uncle. And then, but like the thing is, it's up to them, right?
Yes.
It really is up to them. So I can say, oh my gosh, I think it would be super cool if that was their uncle. And they can be like, oh yeah, that like ratchets up the drama so much more. Or they can say, nah, I'm not really interested in exploring that. And I was like, okay, cool.
Right. And that assumes that the choice for the element is on them. But if the choice for the element to be created is on you,
right?
What we're saying is don't stick that on somebody else unless you've checked with them first.
Yes. Consent. Yeah. Consent is a thing. That's what we're getting to. Consent.
Yep. Otherwise, just put it on yourself. Yeah. Self-consenting.
Yeah. Self-consenting. Cool.
All right, those are our thoughts about collaborative world building. We are big fans, and we think you should work this into your games pretty much anytime you can. And what I would recommend is listen to this episode and then go and listen to the Misdirected Mark episode on leading questions and the Pandas episode on leading questions.
Yeah, because leading questions are great.
Because leading questions is one of the best tools for collaborative world building.
And then you can go play For the Queen a bunch of times because it's kind of like creative collaborative world training wheels, because it both teaches you how to ask questions and how to collaboratively world build.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do those things, you will be in really good shape for collaborative world building.
Yep.
Okay, so cool. We're getting ready to move into the end of the show. But before we do, as we always do, Senda's going to tell us about another show on the Misdirected Mark Network.
Indeed. In Down with D&D, Chris and the Mad Wizard Sean Merwin dish about everything D&D with a focus on the brand and newest edition of the world's most popular tabletop RPG. That would be 5th edition, another game in which you can implement your collaborative world-building skills.
Indeed, indeed. Say, Senda, where do people reach us on the internet?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Pandas Talk Games. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Pandas Talk Games. You can find us in the Misdirected Mark forums, where we continue to run a contest. The first 100 people will be entered to win either a Bag Thulu or a She's a Super Geek dice bag. So come join our forums today. Exciting. Oh yeah, or you can drop us an email, panda@misdirectedmark.com. And Phil, once they have that information or have joined our forums, what can they do with it?
Yeah, please, please, please send us your topics, just like Ryan did this week. You send the topics, we talk about them. That's pretty much the social contract that we have going as you listen to this podcast.
Yep.
So please keep up your end of the bargain by giving us topics. We'll keep up our end of the bargain by making good shows out of them. And don't worry about the topic. You know, I'm pretty crafty at figuring out how to get something out of pretty much any topic.
And don't worry about if you think we might have done it before. We've been doing this for like a while. We don't even remember what we did before. Just throw it out there.
Yeah, we have a rule. If it's 2 years old, then we'll just do it again.
Yep.
So anyway, send us your topics. Those are super, super helpful. And if you like what we do here elsewhere on the Misdirected Mark Network, you can support our Patreon campaign. You can go to patreon.com/MMP. Patrons get all sorts of goodies. They get the bonus outtakes from this show, the Misdirected Mark After Show. They get access to the Slack room for life. If they're so inclined, hook up with us on our Minecraft server, where we're building away night and day. Occasionally, Encoded Designs kicks out some published stuff, and people get that stuff. Well, I like that one a lot. It doesn't happen as much as I'd like to because it takes a while to publish stuff. But I totally like giving patrons stuff.
Definitely does happen.
If I can do it, we'll do it. And the other thing we like to do is give shout outs to some of our patrons in each and every episode. And this week, what do we got?
We have Craig, the Lord of One Name. Indeed. Thank you, Craig. Curtis E. Takahashi. Thank you so much, Curtis. And Evil Rich. Thank you so much, Evil Rich. I'm sure it's a nickname and not actually evil.
Say, there's something else you can do on the internet that if you are already supporting the Patreon or unable to support the Patreon, both are totally fine. There's a thing you can do that makes so happy, and it used to be called iTunes, but it's got some other name now that's less cool. But what's that thing they should do?
Well, you can leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or the podcatcher of your choice. Most of them do let you leave reviews, and every new review we get really does actually help new people find the show and learn about cool things like collaborative world building, because it's awesome and great. And wouldn't you want to share that with more people so that they play awesome games? Yes, is the answer. Anyway, thank you so much to everyone who's already left a review. If you left it somewhere that wasn't the US Apple podcast store, please tell me about it, like on Twitter or something, because we will never find it because it doesn't alert us or anything. So thank you so much to everybody who's already left reviews. And Phil, show me how you are going to include some collaborative world building in your next game. This show is a joint production of She's a Super Geek and Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.
Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got, eh? Show me what you got. Show me what you got, eh?
Clicky. Clicky. Click, 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 click.
built this city.
Built this city,
on dice and words. I'm sticking with it.
All right. That's fine. I love that song. That song is ancient history for you, but I actually remember when that song came out.
Oh, geez.
And in fact, that was Starship, right? So that was Jefferson Starship, which originally was Jefferson Airplane back in the 60s. So
sure.
What was weird was like that song charted in the 80s, right? I'm going to just quick check, right? We built.
I'm going to make you feel really old and tell you that the reason that I really truly know that song is because of the last Muppet movie.
Sure. Whatever.
They rebuilt the stage so they could do the Muppet Show. So they could earn enough money to... I don't remember the plot. To save something.
So I was 13, right?
Okay.
So that makes you this many.
Yes. He held up 3 fingers for everyone.
Right.
Following along at home.
Right. So 1985.
Potentially really 2 fingers. It depends on what time of year it was.
Fair. We're not splitting hairs on this thing. So
Yeah,
so anyway, that song, that song for me was like, cool, there's this cool new rock song by this band Starship. And then my parents like see it and they're like, that's Jefferson Airplane. Right? Like,
yeah. Wow.
they're like, they made all these other songs, you know, like as well. Like the other one I was going to mention, which was, the 90s also spikes the, especially in female fronted bands, like there's like, that's like the first time, anything LGBT kind of comes around. Like Melissa Etheridge, like her her whole album, Yes I Am. Like I totally misunderstood that album when I was a teenager, because I'm listening to it and I'm like, oh, so she's singing to a guy. And like now I realize like, no. Like she was not.
Right. There's a lot of songs in my mix that I'm like, why didn't I hear this when it came out in the 90s when I had that
Right.
huge crush on my friend that I was convinced couldn't possibly be a crush because girls only have crushes on boys. That was funny. And now I'm listening to all this stuff. I'm like, wow, I was seriously not the only one, but like I didn't have any, like, I didn't have a track for this experience. So I just like ignored it and pretended that it wasn't so.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, again, very true. Very true for me as well. Right. Like I go back and listen to these songs and I'm like, like I totally heard these songs in the 90s, but I didn't hear them until now, right? Like,
right.
And I mean, then there's some of the more obvious ones, right? Like I kissed a girl, right? Like that was like that's a great song, right?
Yeah,
like it's just
which I kissed a girl. I kissed a girl and I liked it, or the other one that I suddenly can't remember the tune to.
Oh, I
kissed a girl and I'd do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one too. That's the one that I'm like, why didn't I hear that in the 90s? Anyway, bloop. We really need to start the show, though. We're like 8.5 minutes in.
Yeah. So it's not the Katy Perry one.
Queer shit and music.
Right. Yeah, rock on. That's our show tonight.
No. All right, here we go. Queer shit and music. Bye.
No, we'll do the other thing I wrote.
We'll talk about the thing. We can talk about the thing.
We can do the thing. Ready?
All right, yeah. Meow. Meow. I love the face that goes with your meow. Makes me giggle every time, which is not conducive to starting the show.
I know. It's not a very relaxed...
It's a...
I know. I like really have to work at like getting that sound like to sound like a cat. So I think I wind up... It's kind of like when you're actually thinking too hard and your tongue sticks out. Right? There's a thing you do like when you're thinking really hard about something.
Yes. But like there's a thing that happens with your eyebrows that go together and I don't know.
I know.
Like
that's my think. Right. That's my think hard. Right. Like I'm thinking hard. But eyebrows. Yeah, come together.
You totally just called me out for my tongue sticking out when I think too hard about things.
It's totally true.
I don't know how I feel about this. Okay. Anyway, we should really start the show now.
I believe we can start the show now.
10 minutes in.
Rock and roll.
No, I was about to say.
Oh, damn it. Sorry. Right. No. Shh. Bloop. Do, do. There we go. Make up for a little of that pre-show stuff.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Right. Bloop. I don't know. I have a lot for us to say on this.
I feel like I have a lot to contribute on this. I just changed the color of the next line because
Thank you.
I think
I was
it was
stalling.
supposed to be for me.
I was stalling, hoping you would pick up on that. Thank you.
I was like, wow,
Professional.
he's passing it from himself to himself. That makes no sense.
Correct. Bloop. Let's talk about mid-game. Okay, never mind. Bloop. Not to be confused with Goodrich.
Right. Not
Goodrich. Goodrich doesn't support this podcast. They support another podcast.
It's
but
true.
Evil Rich supports this
Evil
podcast.
Rich. Feel like we win.
Yeah. Bloop. Yeah, definitely with some leading questions. I love me some leading questions. Show me what you got.
Show me what you got. I
What
almost
happened?
started singing the
What
wrong
happened?
song.
Did you mess up?
Show me what you got.
Wow, that was like a failure to initiate end sequence of show.
Show me what you got.
Wow, that is not how that works.
I really did do 8 hours of collaborative world building and also some beer and also a lot of ice cream and then finally some pizza. And that's where I am.
You need to take a deep breath.
I know.
Take one right now. 47 minutes. We can say goodbye to everybody.
Okay.
We've plenty front loaded the front of the show.
Yeah, we did.